Today, we're going to unravel one of the most chilling and just bizarre mysteries in the history of aviation. This is the story of Helios Flight 522, a flight that the world would come to know as the ghost plane.
Okay, so picture this. It's August 14th, 2005. You're looking up at the sky high above Athens, Greece. There's a passenger jet up there, a Boeing 737, and it's just circling. It's been flying in this perfect holding pattern for hours, but something is very, very wrong. Air traffic control can't reach them, not a word. The plane is completely, utterly silent.
So you can imagine what everyone on the ground is thinking, right? Hijacking? Some kind of terrorist threat? With fears running high, the Greek Air Force scrambles two F-16 fighter jets to go take a look. But what those pilots were about to witness would only make the mystery deeper, and it was the first clue to a tragedy born from a whole cascade of human errors. The biggest question was, simply, what was going on inside that plane? To really understand what happened, we've got to rewind to earlier that morning. We're at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. Helios Flight 522 is getting ready for its trip, and honestly, everything seems totally normal. Just another day, another flight.
So, who's on board? You've got 115 passengers. A lot of them are families, excited to be heading out for a summer holiday. They're being looked after by a 6-person crew, flying on a pretty new Boeing 737. The plan is simple. Fly to Athens, then on to Prague. Totally routine.
But inside the cockpit, there's a little bit of a dynamic playing out that nobody can see. The captain, he's a veteran. Over 17,000 flight hours, but he's known for being pretty strict. The first officer is also really experienced, but he'd actually complained to people about the captain's demanding style. And here's a crucial detail. His training records showed that he sometimes had a tough time with the pre-flight checklists, a tiny detail that is about to become absolutely devastating. The plane takes off, no problem at all. But as it starts climbing into that clear morning sky, the very first domino in a deadly chain of events is about to get knocked over. As the plane climbs past 12,000 feet, suddenly this loud alarm starts blaring in the cockpit. Now, this was weird. Really weird. This particular alarm is one that pilots usually only hear when they're on the ground, before takeoff. So to hear it up in the air, it was instantly confusing. And this is where the pilots make a fatal assumption. They think they're hearing a takeoff configuration warning, which basically means the plane isn't set up right for takeoff. But they're not taking off, they're climbing. In reality, that sound was the cabin altitude warning, a supercritical alert telling them that the cabin was losing air pressure and oxygen. They were completely misdiagnosing their own emergency. So, totally confused, the captain radios the airline's ground crew. During that call, an engineer on the ground, the same guy who worked on the plane earlier, has this sudden flash of insight. He asks the one question that could have saved every single person on that plane: is the pressurization mode set to auto? But the pilot, who's already fixated on what he thinks is the problem, just kind of dismisses the question and asks about something else entirely. From here, things just go from bad to worse, and they go fast. As the plane keeps climbing on autopilot, the oxygen masks drop down in the cabin right around 14,000 feet. But by now, the lack of oxygen is already messing with the pilots' brains, their ability to think clearly. By the time they hit their cruising altitude of 34,000 feet, the cockpit goes silent. Radio contact is lost. And that brings us back to those F-16s. For almost 2 hours, the plane just flew on autopilot across Greece, a true ghost plane in the sky. When the fighter jets finally pull up alongside it, what they saw was just, well, it was the stuff of nightmares. The F-16 pilot reports back, and it's chilling. The captain's seat is empty. The first officer is slumped over the controls, totally unconscious. He looks back into the passenger cabin and can see people just motionless in their seats with oxygen masks on. And then he sees movement. A single person walks into the cockpit and sits down in the captain's chair. Just as this mysterious person takes the controls, the inevitable starts to happen. After hours and hours of circling, the plane is finally running out of fuel. The left engine sputters and dies. The plane immediately banks into a sharp, descending turn. Just minutes later, the right engine flames out too, and the plane begins its final plunge. It was only later, when investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder, that they heard these faint, desperate words, "Mayday, Mayday, May," repeated 5 times. But whoever was at the controls, they never managed to hit the button to actually transmit the call.
The plane crashed into the hills near Grammatico, and all 121 people on board were gone.
So what really happened? How could this possibly happen? The crash investigation would piece together this unbelievable story, and they traced the entire disaster back to one single, incredibly simple oversight. You're not going to believe this, but it all came down to the pressurization switch. The night before the flight, an engineer did a cabin leak test and had to set the switch to manual. After the test, he forgot to flip it back to auto. That one tiny mistake meant the plane's cabin wouldn't pressurize on its own as it climbed. So let's just walk through that chain of failure. It started with the engineer's mistake. That's link number 1. The second link? The pilots missed the wrong setting during 3 different pre-flight checks. The third was them misinterpreting that critical alarm. And from there, the plane's fate was basically sealed by the silent killer that had snuck into the cockpit. That silent killer has a name: hypoxia. As the plane climbed higher, the thin air was quietly starving everyone's brain of oxygen. This is so insidious because it doesn't just knock you out. First, it causes confusion and terrible judgment. It means the pilots were physically incapable of figuring out what was wrong. Within just a few minutes, both pilots and then the passengers and the rest of the crew just lost consciousness. And that mysterious figure in the cockpit, the one who tried to save them all, that was a flight attendant named Andreas Protomu. It turns out he also had a commercial pilot's license. By using portable oxygen bottles, he somehow managed to stay conscious after everyone else had passed out. He was the one who went into the cockpit and tried so desperately to save the plane. But he wasn't qualified to fly a 737, and he was facing an impossible situation with no engine power. You know, in the aftermath of a disaster this preventable, the big question is always, how do we make sure this can never, ever happen again? And the tragedy of Helios 522 led directly to some really crucial safety improvements. For one, Boeing made their pre-flight checklists tougher, adding a specific check for that pressurization switch. Pilot training was updated across the board to help them tell the difference between these critical warning sounds. And new procedures were adopted everywhere, all designed to break that chain of failure we just talked about. The story of Helios 522 is it's such a sobering reminder that in a system as complex as an airplane, sometimes the most critical parts are the human beings inside. It just hammers home how important things like checklists, communication, and clear thinking really are. Ultimately, the story of the ghost plane is this powerful testament to how one seemingly tiny mistake, a single switch left in the wrong position, can spiral into an absolutely unimaginable catastrophe. And it really leaves us with a bigger question to think about. How many other tragedies, big and small, start with just one small oversight?